You're listening to the Hazmat Files podcast, where we delve into the critical topics that impact the safety and well-being of first responders in our communities. I'm Erica Fisher, your guide as we chart the hazmat landscape with untold stories and open the files on the complexities of hazmat incidents and the unique challenges they present. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and guest, and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Chemtrec and the American Chemistry Council. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal or professional advice. Listeners are encouraged to seek appropriate counsel or advice pertaining to their specific circumstances. Chemtrec and ACC assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this podcast. All information is provided on an as-is basis. Today, we'll explore the complex role of emergency medical services responding to hazardous material incidents. Pre-hospital medicine is already dynamic and complicated, with research changing protocols on an annual basis. When patients are exposed to hazardous materials, it can compound that complexity and change provider decisions in an instant. In that environment, how can EMS providers keep themselves safe while delivering exceptional pre-hospital care? It's a tough question, so we've invited an expert to help us out. Hazardous materials can include anything from industrial chemicals and toxic gases to biological agents and radioactive substances. The presence of these materials adds an extra layer of risk to an already high-stakes job, demanding meticulous protocols and swift, informed decision-making. Now it's time to welcome today's guest, Adam Weiss, to the Hazmat Files. Adam is a current nationally registered paramedic with over 30 years of advanced field medical experience both in-country and abroad. He serves as a Senior Paramedic Instructor for a Tri-County National Registry Paramedic program. Adam can be seen riding the Advanced Life Support Unit in several of the local counties with his paramedic students, as well as with paramedics in their field training phase. Adam serves as the Training Center Coordinator for 2 National Association of Emergency Medical Technician sites, where he also fills the role of Program Associate Faculty. His responsibilities include assisting potential centers to meet accreditation, certifying instructors, and teaching first responders and the military courses such as Advanced Medical Life Support, Pre-Hospital Trauma Life Support, Tactical Combat Casualty Care, and tactical emergency casualty care. Adam has an extensive background along with decades of operational experience in the chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive field. Adam has served in the role of Chief of Operations for a FEMA Type 1 hazardous material team. He is currently utilized by the U.S. and foreign allied militaries as an instructor in damage control resuscitation, CBRN operations, technical rescue, small unit tactics, and explosive and IED operations. Adam has been utilized as a subject matter expert on the state and government level by providing testimony and at times acting as an advisor to several committees and working groups, like the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Science and Technology's Technical Solutions. He has been involved in the planning as well as the execution of dozens of national special security events. He has firsthand downrange operational experience with accidental hazardous material releases, as well as deliberate, intentional CBRN incidents. He is the president and CEO of Downrange Solutions, a Maryland-based LLC that proudly serves our nation's first responders, government agencies, and the U.S. military, as well as our allied partners by providing tactical, technical, analytical, and educational support. Lastly, Adam is a proud father of 2. He is a native of South Philadelphia and is a diehard Phillies, Eagles, Flyers, and Sixers fan. Hi, Adam. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Erica. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's first dive into an introduction on the intersection of hazmat and emergency medical services, or EMS. Larger jurisdictions continue to spin up EMS units dedicated to hazmat. For the rest of the jurisdictions, Adam, can you describe the most common scenarios where EMS responders must deal with hazardous materials?
Absolutely. I feel that EMS as a whole in country will deal with hazardous materials on a daily basis and really not even think about it. We see a lot of fentanyl, carfentanil, and even xylazine in a lot of different places. The numbers are there to prove all the actual uses. So in 2023, we were looking at roughly 120 million pills that were seized and over 15,000 pounds of powder. Here we are in 2024, and we're midway through the year, and we're over 150 million lethal doses. These are things that EMTs and paramedics, other first responders, police, fire are coming into contact with on a daily basis. EMS will see this on an almost daily basis. The other thing that we're seeing is chemical suicides. Chemical suicides are back again. That's generally where somebody's mixing an acid with a sulfur to create that hydrogen sulfide. They've gone away in the past, but they're back again, and we're seeing increasing numbers. We also have organophosphates and carbonates out in the field, especially in the rural areas. Although this is generally recognized as a weapon of intent and a nerve agent, we also see it in an accidental scenario in the fields.
Wow. So EMTs today are definitely facing more and more hazmat on a daily basis. And EMTs are now getting more than 200 hours of training, and paramedics are pushing 2,000, all before they even test for the registry. Since hazardous materials training is the only emergency response training that is required by law under OSHA Regulation 29 CFR 1910.120, what specific training do EMS personnel receive on hazardous materials? And how often do EMS train on hazmat scenarios? And what does a typical scenario involve for them?
EMS is generally, whether you're an EMT going through your A school or basic school, or a paramedic going through paramedic school, you'll generally receive hazmat awareness. I know that in my program, in the EMS Special Operations program, we'll run them through response to terrorism, the full CBR and gambit, as well as IEDs, explosives, and hazmat. They'll walk out with an operational certificate. When they actually get to the field, it's a little bit different. Unfortunately, a lot of these departments, they have a large agenda when it comes to training. There's so many different things that they need to cover. So hazmat is generally put to the backside. The good thing is that there's a lot of proficiency with the ERG, which is one of the most important things that they're going to utilize when they actually get to the scene. But having that awareness, that true awareness level training, so they understand how to position themselves, what to look for, signs and symptomology, things of that sort. Outside of that, we have NFPA standard, we have OSHA standard, depending on the actual agency itself. Most people will generally get about 8 hours of hazardous material refresher training a year, which in my opinion isn't enough because obviously I'm a big hazmat fan. But having said that, it's generally about 8 hours for the entire year.
How prepared do you feel EMS teams are for hazmat incidents across the United States?
Once again, it goes back to the amount of training that most EMS departments will receive over the course of the year. There's a lot of other things that they need to do, whether it's a BLS agency or ALS agency, so they're getting that bare minimum. I think EMS in general, I'd rate it a B minus, maybe even a C plus. I think there's a lot more that we could be doing, especially as it relates to safe operations, spatial awareness, situational awareness, things of that sort, understanding the actual symptomology that's being presented with the patients at hand. So we have the ability to create a better patient treatment plan.
Raising the level of awareness of these challenges and addressing local hazards is definitely a priority. Training for an EMS team on the basic core competencies and response is crucial in minimizing exposure and preventing further harm. But I agree, some of the other issues they face, timing, funding, and resources, just as with everything else, is always a challenge. How can training improve overall safety and outcomes for EMS during hazmat incidents?
I think it comes down to the training provides this awareness level knowledge that you take with you because you understand the gravity of the scenario, you understand the gravity of the situation. Creating these scenarios gives us repetitions. The more repetition that we have builds that muscle memory. So when we're actually responding to these scenarios, we have that flag that goes up that tells us, hey, we shouldn't move into this area, or this is an asset that we need to utilize for this scene, or this is, in fact, a hazardous material incident. We need to start a special box alarm for it.
I definitely agree with you on the repetition. I can remember back to my basic EMT class where every scenario began with BSI, scene safe. So making sure that you have the muscle memory for it is critical for hazmat. And while both training and planning to properly mitigate these types of incidents is important, one of the primary challenges with hazmat situations is the unpredictability. Hazmat incidents can range from small contained spills to large scale industrial accidents. And many hazmat emergencies are initially dispatched as a person down or person sick, and EMS personnel risk entering the area of the release before even realizing it. How are safety protocols for hazmat incidents different from regular medical emergency protocols?
That's a great question. When you're dispatched for the actual hazardous materials box assignment, you understand what it is that you're going to. The red flag goes up. It's self-explanatory. You're responding to a danger. Sometimes we get lax and we forget that every single scenario, whether police, fire, or EMS that you're responding to, has a potential for catastrophe. So if we follow, just like you said, the BSI, the PPE, but then we also include situational awareness. Scene safety is absolutely paramount. The scene safety is going to be that situational awareness, the spatial awareness. As I walk into the house, do I smell anything? Do I hear anything? Do I see anything? I walk into a house that has the odor of urea or ammonia, and I see coffee filters and lots of trash and things of that sort. Maybe it's a drug lab. Maybe there's powders all over the place. It's us utilizing that good situational and spatial awareness that ultimately carries us through. I think that's the best that we could do out in the field, especially in a scenario where you're walking into the unknown. If we could always take that with us, I think that we're going to be well ahead of the curve.
For EMS protocol to respond to potential hazardous material incidents, responders should consider first, obviously, activities to undertake en route and upon scene. What's the incident? What information do they have? What's been communicated to the dispatch center? 2, guidelines for assessment, decontamination, and treatment of any potentially affected persons. And then 3, patient transport to the hospital. And the steps in this protocol should be practiced before any hazmat emergencies occur. So that goes back to the training piece where typically they get about 8 hours of awareness, but you have the exercise piece, and actually putting that training into practice is so critical. On EMS calls, a rescuer entering a contaminated area also risks exposure and the potential to become another victim. Even though rescue of an injured patient is important, it should only be attempted without undue risk to the responder. What are the most significant health risks to EMS personnel when managing hazmat incidents? How can these risks be minimized? What are the essential tools and equipment EMS personnel must have when responding to a hazmat scene?
I think that the ultimate price to pay would be death. And unfortunately, that's something that we don't want to see. I think through more training, through the awareness to understand that when we go into a scene, we might not see anything, but it doesn't mean that something's not there. There's plenty of chemicals that are out there that even unintentional release will displace oxygen, drop oxygen content. I could remember several scenarios back in the 90s where one police officer died in New Jersey running into a construction site. So it's having that awareness level training to understand that unless you have personal protective gear, SCBA, we can't move forward into these scenarios. And then having said that, we also have to protect ourselves on the small end. So death is the immediate problem. That's the acute problem. There's a lot of things that are out there that may cause that chronic effect. We may see some cancers down the line. So ensuring that you're wearing PPE, if you're in a dusty scenario, ensuring that you're wearing that dust mask. There's so many different materials out there that we can inhale, fine particulate that may not cause a problem now, but 3 to 5 years from now may manifest themselves into some form of cancer. And we don't want to see that at all either.
Absolutely. The personal protective equipment is critical. Are there any other essential tools or equipment that EMS are provided when responding to a hazmat scene?
I think the biggest thing that we could do, once again, I'll go back to the BSI. We have a very robust BSI program. We have the ability to utilize gloves, we have goggles, we have gowns, we have things of that sort to create that body isolation. If you walk into that overdose, had a scenario the other day, walked into an overdose, 4 people down at the same time, lots of Narcan being given, and there was product all over the house. We had police, we had fire, we had EMS all over the house, people moving. A lot of times with this fine material, we have the ability to re-aerosolize it. So ensuring that you're covered up, that you have your arms covered, that you have your mask on so that you're not accidentally inhaling or breathing anything in. I honestly think that it falls back to BSI and PPE. We're not going to move into a downrange scenario, into a hot zone, unless we're a part of an actual downrange asset like a hazardous material team, whether we're operating on the decon line as the actual medic on the downrange on the decon line, or whether we're acting as a downrange team going to do downrange triage in a hazardous area.
As you mentioned earlier, too, the ERG is a critical tool that EMS personnel can utilize when responding to a hazmat scene. The field of paramedicine is ever evolving. Paramedics possess a wide range of knowledge, skills, and scope of practice to provide optimal health outcomes to their patients. Are there any new technologies or innovations in protective gear or detection equipment that are changing how EMS and paramedics may respond to hazmat emergencies in the future?
Yes, currently EMS, EMTs, and paramedics are cold zone entities unless you're actually assigned to that downrange element. And that's exactly where we need to be. Having said that, there have been so many different technological changes over the past 10 years that will assist us. The actual downrange teams will go down, they'll go into that hot zone, they'll identify the actual products and material that they have, which ultimately affects us. Although we don't have the technological advancement on our end, the teams that are going downrange will. So with immediate product identification, that gives us an idea as to how we have to protect ourselves, what we're looking for, symptomology, things of that sort, as far as our patients go. So although we're not using it, it's being used for us. I definitely think that we benefit from the new downrange technologies that have been established for those hazmat teams.
As soon as you're provided with additional information, you are able to start thinking about, as you said, what are the symptoms? What are the treatments you may be able to provide any impacted people, as well as communicate to the hospital what the number of potential patients, as well as what you've already been able to see on scene. The collaboration, as you talked about, between EMS, fire departments, and specialized hazmat teams is vital. Each group brings its own expertise to the scene of a hazmat incident. EMS professionals are often the first to assess the medical needs of those affected, while hazmat specialists focus on containing and neutralizing the hazard. How can EMS and hazmat teams best coordinate during an emergency?
Great question. So fortunately, through the incident command system, through rehearsal, through pre-plan, I think this is where we really shine. I think that if we can train together, if EMS actually trains with the hazardous material team, the commanders get together, we do some pre-planning, we talk about objectives as far as their objectives and our objectives, kind of what we're expecting. So whether I'm the downrange asset or whether I'm on the medical side, we all have expectations of each other. If I'm on the EMS side, my expectation of the hazardous material team is to have that rapid identification and then to come back to us to give us that identification of the material that they've actually found, so that once again, we're able to better treat. We could find reversals. We have treatment plans, things of that sort. The incident command system, it's the backbone of everything that we do, ICS and NIMS. With ICS, there is that definite connect between the actual hazmat branch and the medical branch with inside operations. If we can start the relationship prior to, then it's just going to work out better in the end. It's kind of like the old adage of emergency planning and preparedness. Mitigation and planning lead to that smoother response and recovery. If we could start planning together, then we're going to have that much of a smoother response because we already have that relationship and we already know what each other's expectations are.
Adam, you've highlighted why this coordinated effort is crucial in managing these complex emergencies effectively. Can you provide a general example of effective communication from a past incident?
Absolutely. I think communication is obviously the most important thing that we have in our lives. Whether you're at work, whether you're at home, whether it's family, doesn't make a difference. It's also the first thing to go in any time of chaos. So the amount of pre-planning that we can do, establishing that relationship, we already have a better idea of what we're looking for and expectations. As far as successful communication, I believe that EMS providers as a whole will have this success on a daily basis, not just in hazardous materials, but the other scenarios that they're running, whether it's medical or cardiac. We understand the concept of open loop and closed loop communications, and I think that we use them really well. When it comes time for the larger scenarios and we exercise these communication fundamentals, I think it really helps us out. We've had several scenarios. One example, I could go back to the 2000s. I was one of the responders for an actual domestic biological incident in the early 2000s. EMS really wasn't included back then because we didn't have the fundamentals that we do with NIMS. ICS was still limited. And I think that bringing them in, having them take part as a stakeholder, opening up that line of communication led to so many different successes and then future successes. We saw after 2001 and 2003 between anthrax and ricin, running a lot of assignments, having that open line of communication led to a lot of success. And we all have the same goals. We want to mitigate the scenario, but at the same time, we all want to go home at the end of the watch. I think that communication, all the work that we put into the communication, led to a lot of really, really good end results.
EMS must increasingly be prepared for new response challenges and be able to understand and manage emerging hazards. It is critical that both fire and emergency service establish relationships with industry and their community to establish effective partnerships for prevention, response, and mitigation. Adam, you've been involved in EMS for over 30 years, both in country and abroad. Could you share a particularly challenging hazmat incident that you encountered? And if you don't mind walking us through how you handled it from an EMS standpoint.
What I'll do is I'll go back to an incident that took place here on U.S. soil back in the early 2000s, an actual domestic biological event. The tie-in, the connect with EMS, back in those days, EMS really wasn't a big part of the actual operational plan. As far as EMS went, they were just there. And if somebody needed them, they ran to them. After we realized things from the first domestic biological event that took place, we worked them into the plan. They were there. They had an actual operational say. They were a stakeholder. So we were ultimately utilizing a unified command system before unified command was even put together. It's absolutely important because we need to hear what EMS has to say. You have responders that are going down range. They're looking at taking care of those people. We have operational assets. We have that medical branch in the operations section. We also have medical and logistic for the actual responders. So having EMS there was the actual appropriate thing to do. It was something that really wasn't done before in the past, and it ultimately led to better future outcomes. We had one domestic biological event, and then several years later had another domestic biological event. Having EMS there and ultimately listening to what had to have been said by the EMS branch was absolutely paramount to the success of the actual operation.
A key lesson learned that I take away from you sharing that incident is EMS being invited to have a seat at the table in incident command really does help make for a more effective response. Are there any lessons learned from that incident that you feel would improve hazmat responses by EMS professionals in the future?
Absolutely. Just ensuring that they're there. Obviously, EMS has such a huge role in everything that we do, whether we're supporting law enforcement, whether we're supporting fire service, it doesn't make a difference. We have a role. Ultimately, we should have a place at the table for every single scenario that's going on out there. It's not just medicals and cardiacs that we're responding to. So when the downrange teams are conducting their identification and they find that they have XYZ material, it's the hazmat branch as well as us that's going to come up with that treatment plan. We're going to have that good communication with the actual hazmat branch. We're talking to research and we're formulating our plan. We're looking at the fact, hey, do we have the ability to utilize any sort of reversal agents? Definitely a place at the table. I think that the faster that an EMS agency, whether it's fire EMS based, can start working with their hazmat team, I think that you're going to have better future outcomes. Once you start establishing that communication, once you start looking at expectations, that's ultimately where it's at. You put that all together, you start doing some training, you start rehearsing, you start doing your pre-plans. That's ultimately how we come up with successful end results. And I think it's a lot safer as well. It cuts down on the amount of freelancing that we're going to have, which that's the last thing that we need at any type of scenario.
Incredible work, Adam. Your story really highlights the importance of preparation and teamwork in these hazmat situations. Thank you so much for sharing that. Are there any upcoming changes in regulations or practices that could impact how EMS handles hazmat situations?
Currently, on the OSHA side, I don't believe so. NFPAs, they retool their policies and procedures, and that is going on right now as we speak as far as competencies in response to WMD and hazmat type scenarios. So NFPA is always moving forward. I think OSHA is moving forward. Not everybody applies to NFPA, not everybody applies to OSHA, but as long as we keep making progression in our policies and procedures, which I absolutely see. I think there's also so many different classes that are out there right now. We see that as well. There's so much more education now in 2024 than there was back in 2004. I think that we're definitely in a good place. We're making great progress, and I definitely see great things to come.
As you've mentioned earlier, the amount of hazmat incidents that an EMS personnel may respond to in their time, in their volunteer or career as an EMT, what, if any, future challenges do you anticipate in the intersection of EMS and hazmat?
Great question. I see drugs. One of the big things that I believe that we'll see is drugs. Every year we have something new coming out in the street. At one point in time, it was fentanyl and carfentanil, and now we're looking at xylazine, and there's always going to be another material that comes out. If we could stay ahead of that curve, once we get it, we take that education, we push it out to everybody throughout the United States. There's a lot of good programs that are out there. I'd say absolutely get in line with your fusion center. A lot of times we sit on information. I'm not exactly sure why. It's a disconnect that we have where a command staff member may get some information. I understand there's certain things that we have to hold in, but for the most part, when it comes down to things like, hey, xylazine's out on the street. Xylazine's been out for a long time, but a lot of people are just starting to talk about it over the past year or so. We definitely have to have that awareness level knowledge. I think the other thing is random acts of violence. We're getting into a point in time where we're seeing different things. There's always the possibility for CBRN to take place. We have had some domestic type CBRN incidents here in the United States. I think we're always going to have that. There was a scenario out in California not too long ago where an individual was just bored. They went to the local Walmart. They took a couple things off the shelf. They legitimately created a chemical warfare agent. They allowed it to off gas. They dispersed it with a fan. People got sick. And that was for no other reason than somebody was just bored on a Tuesday morning.
It seems that responders will face more and more potentially hazardous materials and alternative fuels, as well as biological incidents that will require them to have firsthand knowledge, skills, and abilities to deal with the hazards that they pose. Even as fire and EMS continue to face the challenge of funding shortfalls, especially in specialty response areas such as hazmat, for EMS and hazmat in the future, there needs to be a continued emphasis on awareness, training, and funding to prepare these challenges. Remember, a fundamental principle for all first responders is to determine the scene is safe to avoid becoming a victim yourself. Assess the scene as you approach and continue to monitor. Prioritizing patient care over scene safety can lead to serious, even permanent consequences. Your safety is always top priority. As we wrap up today's episode, let's remember the critical role EMS has in hazmat situations. Their quick thinking, specialized training, and unwavering dedication to saving lives and protecting our communities from potentially devastating incidents. Adam's experience underscores the expertise required of EMS professionals during hazardous material incidents. It also highlights the importance of ongoing training and the need for continuous support for our first responders. We encourage you to support your local rescue squad and/or fire department in your community by making a donation. Most organizations have a donate section on their department's website. Your support is crucial as it helps to protect timely and effective emergency response, enhances community safety, and helps save lives. Adam, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your insights and your over 30 years of EMS experience.
Thank you so much for having me, Erica.
Thanks for listening to the Hazmat Files podcast. Don't forget, if you're looking for more hazmat training, visit hazmatcourses.com for free online available 24/7 training courses from TransCare. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and we'll see you next time on the Hazmat Files.